Hello and welcome to Strat News Global. 65 years ago this week, His Holiness the Dalai Lama entered India to remain here in exile forever since then. Under what circumstances he had to leave Lhasa, the capital of Tibet, and how he dramatically entered India to be sheltered forever since then by the Indian government and the Indian people is something I'm going to speak about in this episode of Simply Nitin. I'm Nitin Gokhale. So, March 1959, it was a troublesome month for the Tibetans and for the young Dalai Lama, who was barely 23 years old, when the Chinese marched into Tibet and took control. There was a sense of foreboding, also a sense of dread that the Chinese may arrest the Dalai Lama and keep him forever incarcerated. So on 17th of March 1959, Dalai Lama and some of his closest associates, some cabinet members and his closest family, left Lhasa to travel southwards towards the McMahon Line and into Northeast Frontier Agency, what is now Arunachal Pradesh. It took them nearly a fortnight to travel over difficult passes, very inhospitable terrain, and also trying to evade any chasing Chinese troops or the PLA troops after them who would have prevented them from coming into India. Fortunately, the Dalai Lama's entourage was absolutely small and made up of his most trusted and closest people. Therefore, not a word went out about his journey or how he fled or how he left Lhasa dressed as an ordinary Chinese soldier. The temporal leader, in fact, reached on March 26th, he reached the Lunse Zong, which is a few days, that time, which was few days walk away from the McMahon Line, which divides India and Tibet even today. And he sent a letter from there ahead with one of his couriers to the Indian government, to Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, seeking asylum or seeking help because he wanted refuge in India. He didn't say asylum, but he said, I want refuge in India. And I quote what he said in that letter partly. Ever since Tibet went under the control of Red China and the Tibetan government lost its powers in 1951, I, my government officers and citizens have been trying to maintain peace in Tibet. But the Chinese government has begun gradually subduing the Tibetan government. In this crucial situation, we are entering India via Sona. Unquote. That is what is in essence the Dalai Lama's letter said. And again I quote, I hope that you will please make necessary arrangements for us in the Indian territory, confident of your kindness. Unquote. Sona is the last town north of the McMahon Line in Tibet. So once he sent that message, Dalai Lama was confident that he would be received by the government representatives in Tawang, and then of course he will be taken to other places. So this message was conveyed to Delhi, immediate measures were taken, and the party, his party, that is his close family, 4 of his cabinet ministers, some attendants and bodyguards, at the first Indian post, according to Claude Arpi, Tibetan historian, Tibetologist, and very well respected man who knows more about Tibet than most of us Indians, where he says in one of his posts about this historical event that the first Indian post on the border is Chungthangmu, north of Tawang, where the party or the Dalai Lama's party was received in the coming Frontier Division, which was then the coming Frontier Division. And of course, then he was taken first to a place called Kinzamane, then to Tawang, then onwards to Bonbila. But it's interesting how Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru replied to the Dalai Lama at that point in time. And I quote again, "My colleagues and I welcome you and send you greetings on your safe arrival in India. We shall be happy to afford the necessary facilities for you, your family, and the entourage to reside in India. The people of India who hold you in great veneration will no doubt accord their traditional respect to your person." Unquote. Once that was done, I think the red carpet was laid out for the Dalai Lama. And once he came in there, this is where the entire India-China equation changed, because Dalai Lama was granted exile. There was a establishment of the government in exile of the Tibetan central administration. The Dalai Lama, of course, went and settled down in Dharamshala, where his headquarters was established. And of course, the entire Tibetan exodus from Tibet began thereafter, as soon as the Dalai Lama's entry was known to the world. Interestingly, it was the 5 Assam Rifles Battalion which escorted the Dalai Lama 4 or 5 days walk from north of Tawang to the famous Buddhist monastery which is located in Tawang. It is one of the oldest monasteries in the world, especially in the cult or the sect that the Dalai Lama leads. And it is a revered kind of a shrine for people following that particular sect. So on March 29, the Assam Rifles Party, under a junior Tibetan officer, reached the advance party under a junior Tibetan officer from the Dalai Lama's side, reached Chungthangmu. The Assam Rifles platoon was waiting there, that the main party, they were told, will arrive on March 31st, as far as Dalai Lama himself was concerned. And sure enough, at about 2 o'clock on 31st March 1959, the Dalai Lama, ever smiling, fit and confident, walked into the Indian territory. And those photographs are available, you can see them on the screen. The Dalai Lama and his party reached Khinzamane, which demarcates the frontier near the Chungthangmu post. And he was received by the assistant political officer in charge of the coming frontier division. His name was Murthy, according to the records that are available. And then he received the Dalai Lama, and all the arms and ammunition that the party was carrying was handed over to the Indians, except that was possessed by the Dalai Lama and his family. All rifles were handed over for safe custody into Indian hands. And of course, the Assam Rifles then escorted him, as I said, at 9 a.m. the next day. The Dalai Lama met the assistant political officer again, and on April 2nd, they moved to the Gorsam Chorten, located near Zimithang, south of the McMahon Line. That's how the Dalai Lama and his party entered India. Historical event, as I mentioned, and ever since then, Dalai Lama has called India his home. Although he pines for a return to Potala Palace, which was his headquarters, which was his abode, his temporal headquarters. But the Dalai Lama, who is now in his late 80s, clearly knows that there is no going back to Tibet or to Lhasa. And to mark that occasion, the 31st of March 1959 entry into India, the reality is that after 65 years, the Dalai Lama has spent more time in India than he did in Tibet. He was, of course, like I said, a young, fit man, smiling, very revered amongst the Tibetans. But when he left Lhasa, the Chinese were furious, they couldn't find him. And when they found that he had come to India, it was further impetus for the Chinese to then look at India as the permanent adversary on the south side of the McMahon Line. Of course, 3 years after that, India and China fought that bitter war in the high Himalayas, especially in the Kameng sector. Remember, the most humiliating setback for Indian Army happened in the Kaming Frontier Division, or what is now called West Kaming. Elsewhere in Walong and in Ladakh, the Indians fought very valiantly and bravely, and at some places even pushed back the Chinese. But the fact is that the Dalai Lama's coming into India created more tension between India and China, and India was willing to take that risk when it gave the asylum or the refuge to Dalai Lama. Asylum is the wrong word, because that is not something that was used, but at that point it was used as the word was used was a refuge. And of course, as he travelled down south towards Lumla and to Tawang, the local Monpa population, which were anyway following the Tibetan religion, were ecstatic that they had their temporal guru coming in there. And once they came, the Dalai Lama was, as usual, very curious. You will remember, the viewers of Strat News Global, that even 4 years ago, when second time I interviewed him in Bodh Gaya, I had first time interviewed him in 2010, and then in 2020 in Bodh Gaya. Dalai Lama has this impish sense of humor and a very curious mind. And you can see the link of that interview. In fact, we began Strat News Global's YouTube journey with the interview that I took of the Dalai Lama in Bodh Gaya. So I have a special, I would say, connection or blessings from the Dalai Lama himself in that sense. So I wanted to give you a historical perspective, and this event may go unnoticed because somehow the Tibetan cause has fallen off the radar, not in the Indian establishment but amongst the Indian population. Not many people know how he came, how he had to endure the Chinese pressure, and how India welcomed him with open arms. So there are stories about how the Assam Rifles was the first one to escort him. There were the IB people, the Intelligence Bureau people there. There was a political officer. There was the local population. All of them welcomed him. And I have one more point of interest to tell you, that there was a journalist or a reporter of the Guwahati-based Assam Tribune, which was the most prominent paper. It still continues to be the most prominent paper in the Northeast. His name was Naresh Rajkhwa, who of course has passed away by now. He had reached 4 or 5 days after the news broke about Dalai Lama coming into India, reached midway somewhere between Bumla and Tawang, and then finally I'm sorry, not Bumla and Tawang, but Bomdila and Tawang, and then he managed to hitch a ride on the jeep that was transporting the Dalai Lama to Tejpur, which was in the hills, in the foothills of the Arunachal Pradesh or NEFA foothills, and of course on the banks of the Brahmaputra, where he did what can be called the first media interview of the Dalai Lama. And Naresh Rajkhwa, of course, was much senior to us. When I was based in Assam, I actually heard this story from Naresh Rajkhwa a number of times, how he interviewed the Dalai Lama, how he spoke about the yearning even then to go back to Tibet as soon as possible. He had hoped to settle with the Chinese, and he had not wanted independence or independent Tibet from the Chinese. He had come to accept autonomy or an autonomous state under the Chinese state, but that was not to be. And here we are, 65 years later. The Dalai Lama is more or less Indian, has been staying in India for 65 years, and of course continues to be the most identifiable symbol of Buddhism the world over. Of course, he is getting on in age, but his spirit remains as strong as ever, as we know. And we also know that how the Chinese dread the Dalai Lama's interviews, his statements. Of course, he tried to reconcile with the Chinese over the years, but that has not happened, and continues to remain a factor in the India-China equations or relations. Maybe not as dominant as it was as he was earlier, but the fact is he is still an important personality. and therefore I thought I'll bring to your notice this historical event which happened exactly 6 decades and more ago. That's all I have in this episode of Simply Nitin. Do catch some of the rare footage that is available on YouTube through various sources, through even Films Division, through some private sources, and how he arrived in Tejpur, which is again, like I said, a prominent town in Assam, is also available, the footage that is available. It was a different era, it was a different complete context, and of course, did India suffer because of Dalai Lama's arrival and Dalai Lama staying in India is the question everybody wants to have an answer for, but I don't have a clear answer about this. But still, the fact is that Dalai Lama stays in India and the Chinese don't like it. He is one of those 3 T's that the Chinese get irritated with. And when I call them 3 T's, it is Tibet, Tiananmen Square and Taiwan. And all 3 issues, if not at least 2 issues, if not 3, are alive in the minds of the analysts and commentators the world over. Do keep watching Stat News Global and keep sending your feedback. We always welcome it. Of course, our social media handles are there for all to see. And your comments and feedback is something that we will welcome as we go along. But for the time being, that's all I have. Goodbye.